Hello everyone, thank you for joining me for another video. It's been almost 2 weeks since the last video, which has been a little longer than normal. But I'm back here ready to go with a new video, and joining me is a friend of the channel, Bob from Elijah's Cloak. Don't forget to check out Elijah's Cloak YouTube channel. Bob, like Xavier and others on the channel, is filled with great knowledge when it comes to a lot of Catholic prophecies, Marian apparitions, and much more. And Bob, I just wish to say thank you for taking up the invitation once again to come on. You're very welcome to be here.
Oh, it's my honor to be here. I'm glad to do it, Mark. Good seeing you again.
Yeah, you too. I love the fact that we're all coming together from different points of the world, and you and I across the pond again, bringing something hopefully fresh to the audience. What I want to talk about today with Bob, then, everyone, is something that we've probably covered in the past, but with a lot of things changing in the world, things happening in the church, for Bob and I and others, we just see the jigsaw pieces still coming in quick and fast, making this image almost clear. It's becoming more clearer, but the main frame of it all, it still goes back to Fatima. And how does that connect through Garabandal and Akita, plus a few quotes of certain mystics and saints that echo and repeat the same messages that focus a lot on what's going on within the church, what's going to come from within the church, and what's going to happen in the bigger picture in the world concerning certain nations, certain events, etc. So make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, share far and wide while we dive into this together.
Well,
So,
Mark,
yeah,
good.
yeah. So the first thing I was wanting to cover, therefore, let's go back just to that, the big one, Fatima. Our Blessed Mother appeared in Fatima, Portugal in 1917, from May 13th through the consecutive months till October 13th, to three young children. And the great miracle of the sun happened on October 13th, where an estimated 70,000 plus people witnessed it, and also many miracles, many conversions came. And now we have a massive basilica in Fatima, Portugal, for millions to visit every single year as a result of that. For many years, nothing much more came of it until the shooting of the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II on May 13th, 1984, which was the anniversary of that first apparition in Fatima. And then afterwards, with the commission, the investigation being opened, Lucia, the little girl, was now a Carmelite nun living away from the world. And long story short, eventually she has to write everything down, and that's where we come to know of the secret of Fatima. Some refer to the three secrets, the third secret being the main mystery of it all. The debates continue about that, if it's all been revealed. It was all about the consecration of Russia to avert many things that came in the end, and so forth, and so far, so forth. But then we've got Garabandal that seems to continue with more bluntness in our messages, followed into Akita. But let's just back up a little bit and say, what's the main thing to take from Fatima, assuming most people watching this are aware of it already? What are the key
Well,
points
I
of
think
Fatima?
I think that the question about what you just mentioned about the third secret is the most important because if you're of the opinion that it's all been revealed, then Fatima is kind of questionable regarding its tie to Akita and Garabandal. Now we had the miracle there, yeah, the first and the second secrets, and especially the one about Russia, and it needs to be converted. But I think that the boat, as we say in America, the boat has sailed on the question about the third secret. I think that it has not all been revealed. And my witnesses to that fact are the popes, Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict, because the comments that they said about the third secret. So if the third secret was just a vision, which Cardinal Bertoni he published in the year 2000, if it was just a secret, then what the popes had to say about the third secret don't correspond with just a vision. It doesn't make any sense. So sometimes people get upset and they think that you're saying that this person and that person lied. Well, what it looks like to me is that there's been a deception, not necessarily a lie, but I think that there has been a deception regarding everything that's been revealed regarding the third secret, because it's definitely not complete. So Cardinal Bertoni, he was asked about it after he published The Secret, and he did that with great fanfare. And his answer was kind of evasive. He was asked direct question about whether there was an additional text, and his answer was evasive. And if someone's curious, they can go look that up. I'm sure there's a video out there they can still look at regarding that. But what I could do was touch upon maybe a couple quotes from the popes, because they definitely read the third secret. And if you believe the popes, which I do, then I believe that there's another text that has not been published. And the first one that I can think of is in 1980 of Pope John Paul II. And again, he was asked specifically at this point, the vision or nothing about the third secret was revealed. He said that, as a matter of fact, I'm going to bring it up and read it rather than me paraphrase it.
Sure.
One second here. So this is in 1980 in Germany. He said regarding, again, the third secret, it should be sufficient for all Christians to know this. If there is a message in which it is written that the oceans will flood whole areas of the earth, and that from one moment to the next, millions of people will perish, truly the publication of such a message is no longer something to be so much desired. And that was his explanation as why the Vatican did not release the third secret in 1960. It refers to this flooding, the ocean flooding whole areas of the earth. Is that in the vision that was published in 2000? No, it wasn't. This is something very specific. And this is something that's in the text that has not been revealed, at least not formally revealed. And then even more so than Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict really discussed the third secret quite a bit. And here's another one. And I have several comments from Pope Benedict. And he says here, this is regarding, again, a question regarding the third secret. And this was done in 2010. We often worry about the social, cultural, and political consequences of faith, taking for granted that this faith exists. And what he's talking about here is apostasy, taking for granted that this faith exists. In other words, he's thinking of a time, and this is all in reference to the third secret, that there will not be the faith as he would know it. And that is a direct reference to the apostasy. Also, in Padre Pio is another one in his interview that you mentioned earlier, Mark, about his interview about Fatima, and this was done with Father Amorth. He said that the apostasy is the main concern of the third secret. Now, from comments that you get from Pope John Paul II and also Pope Benedict, it looks to me like there's a twofold message here. chastisement that is physical and a chastisement that is spiritual. So when Pope John Paul was talking about flooding, he was talking about a physical chastisement. And Pope Benedict and Padre Pio, they're talking about a spiritual chastisement, an apostasy, which again, this apostasy is something that was mentioned by St. Paul in Second Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. And it says that that will not become the second coming unless the apostasy comes first, to
Mm.
paraphrase.
Yeah, you've covered a good bit there, Bob, as well. Because I want to just get a couple other quotes in that I have up here from a previous video, the Fatima and Garabandal connections, which I'll leave a link for people to watch afterwards. Because there's a few there who did read the Third Secret. One of them was the former papal theologian to five popes, Cardinal Luigi Chiappi, and he read the Third Secret and he wrote in 1995. In the Third Secret, it is foretold, among other things, that the great apostasy in the church begins at the top. And now there's another one, as you mentioned, with Pope Benedict, but at the time when he was still Cardinal, Joseph Ratzinger, he affirmed that the Third Secret concerns a radical call for conversion, the absolute importance of history, the dangers threatening the faith and the life of the Christian, and therefore of the world, and then the importance of the Novicini, the last events at the end of time. But the things contained in the Third Secret correspond to what has been announced in Scripture and are confirmed by many other Marian apparitions. And that's why I wanted this video to come up, because I think everything Our Lady's mentioned from Quito, La Salette, onwards to Garabandal and Akita, it's like Ratzinger is at the time, he was aware of all these based on his position of head of the CDF for nearly a quarter of a century. He was aware of a lot, and I think as he has it in front of him, we're piecing it together also in our way when it comes to seeing the pieces come together.
So what Cardinal Choppy said is tied directly to La Salette, where La Salette said that Satan would assume the seat of the Vatican. And that also ties together with Akita and Garabandal. And Akita talks about Satan infiltrating at the top between cardinals and the bishops, and that's why cardinals and bishops would be opposed to each other. And in Garabandal, it's maybe even a little harsher than Akita, where it says that many cardinals, bishops, and priests on the road to perdition and taking many souls with them. It's all tied together. And, what we really should have is we should have the text. And the question is why the Vatican won't release it when obviously some of this message is already out there in other Marian apparitions. If it's something that's embarrassing, they should just release it and it is what it is rather than be clandestine. And unfortunately, and there's a couple of things I think that lead to bad consequences with the way that they are covering this up. And one is that with the faithful, it engenders mistrust. So they look at what's happening there with the Third Secret and they say, well, if we can't trust the church, who can we trust? And if they're being deceptive about this, what else are they being deceptive about? So there's that relationship between the hierarchy and the faithful that I think is put at risk, based upon this desire to keep this covered up. And also, the church is basically puts itself against heaven when heaven requested that this be read in 1960. So what it tried to do in the year 2000 is I think it tried to read some of it and put the matter at rest by saying, this is the vision. The vision's all about the Pope being shot. Nothing more to see here. Fatima's done. Let's move on. But then you have Pope Benedict say, if you think that the message of Fatima is over with, then you're you're mistaken. So he said that in a comment, and I'm paraphrasing that, but he said that in a comment. It wasn't part of the release in 2000, but he said that separately.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about a few things regarding Fatima. One of the questions is about the consecration. And there's so many divergent views on the consecration. It's incredible. And this is part of the reason why another reason why I think like the Vatican should just come clean. And I don't care who actually released it, Cardinal Bertoni or whatever cardinal is involved, and just release it because people they're not trusting, they're losing the trust of the faithful by not releasing it. And looking at the consecration, you can see that evident there. You have people that say, well, the consecration wasn't done. And we don't believe it was done. So if they had more trust, they wouldn't be saying things like that. Now, there's good reasons, like the consecration in 1942 by Pope Pius XII. There's good reasons why people say that wasn't done adequately, although it was done in a manner that where Jesus appeared to Sister Lucia and said that it was not done completely, but he was kind of giving us partial credit. And he said he would shorten the war. So World War II was shortened because of that attempt at the consecration, which tells me that if the consecration was done as requested previously to World War II, World War II may not have happened at all. So how many millions died because we didn't do a 15-minute prayer? Then in 1984 was Pope John Paul II, and this is 3 years after the assassination attempt on his life. And he did it, but he did not mention Russia. There's somewhat of a controversy, again, going back to this whole trust thing, controversy about whether Sister Lucia actually wrote a letter by her own volition. In other words, that said that this was actually the completion of the consecration, which Cardinal Bertoni held in his hand in the year 2000, which begs a lot of questions like, why do you wait till the year 2000 to release that? And why do you hold on to that for so long? And just the questions around whether it was really from Sister Lucia, whether she did it of her own free will, or did she do it out of obedience? So there's controversy about that. And just looking at what Pope John Paul II did really a very good consecration. And I think he didn't use the word consecration, used the word entrustment. But he had all the bishops involved. And there's arguments about whether all the bishops participated. And I don't really think that's a criteria. The criteria is that it's open to all the bishops to participate. If one bishop does not participate, it doesn't invalidate it.
Yeah, it might slip in or it was unwell. How much OCD
Yeah,
do we have to until it's correct?
exactly. There's this nonsensical idea out there. Well, every single bishop has to. Yeah, no, that's not. Heaven's not looking for that. Heaven's not, they're not accountants up there, accountant bishops. If the intent is for all bishops to participate, then I think that's sufficient for heaven. And what he, the problem that was mentioned is that he did not mention Russia. He wanted to, but he was talked out of it. But he did mention peoples that are await your blessing or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing it. So he made an allusion to Russia, but didn't use the word Russia. And I'm kind of thinking that that was a very good attempt at the consecration. And if in 1942 we received partial credit, we received a lot of credit for that one. And 1991, Russia collapsed. Well, I should say Russia. The Soviet Union collapsed. And I think that was all due to this consecration in 1984. And I'm old enough to remember it. It was like it was magic. Or this collapse was just like it was magic. First, the Berlin Wall came down, and then the whole Soviet Union collapsed. And it was amazing. And the interesting part is there was also, I don't want to get off topic here, but there was also an apparition at Khrushchev in Ukraine and in 1987. And in 1987, our Blessed Mother said that you will soon be free, talking to Ukraine. And that tells me that it's according to the plans, you know, according to the foresight of heaven, that it did accept to at least to an extent what was done in 1984. Then in 2022, I think there may be even more people for some reason against the consecration in 2022 than there were in 1984. The one in 2022 was done perfectly. It was done to the letter. And I think to Pope Francis's credit, he made sure that he knew what was required and made sure he did what was required. And again, the objection, there's two objections to the one in 22. One, people say not every bishop participated, which is a bunch of baloney, like they say in the United States.
Do you
And
believe then this consecration has been done the way Pope Francis did it?
yes, absolutely.
Well, on
And
that,
I got one other thing I want to mention before we get off that.
yeah.
So it's kind of proof of it. The other objection is in 2022, in that consecration, people say it was not valid because basically they don't like the Pope or they think the Pope is not the Pope. So he cannot perform the consecration. And I think in a lot of cases, that is the unsaid reason of why they think the consecration was not done in 2022. And it's not for us to say whether Pope Francis is the Pope or not. Obviously, he is the Pope. If we think he's not a good Pope, I should say, if we think he's not a good Pope, it's not for us to say that he's not the Pope. There are a bunch of cardinals in Rome who think he is the Pope, and he was elected as the Pope, whether you like it or not. But maybe if he's a bad Pope, maybe that's the Pope we deserve. And think of it that way. Because you look at the laity, do we really deserve a good Pope? Do we deserve another St. Pius X? We're going to need one, but we can't say that we deserve it.
That goes back to St. John Eudes, isn't it? The biggest punishment God can inflict on us is to give us bad priests. I dare say that would go as bishops, cardinals, and pope. They'll have to start as a priest. But just when you say that you're for that consecration of Pope Francis, I have this very old book, Our Lady of Fatima, Prophecies of Tragedy or Hope. And on page 77, there is a quote where Lucia, who continued to have apparitions throughout the rest of her life in the convent, from the Lord as well as Our Lady, Writes here, quoting Jesus, I believe it was, the Holy Father, pray very much for the Holy Father. He will do it, but it will be late. Nevertheless, the Immaculate Heart of Mary will save Russia, which has been entrusted to it. And in brackets, see memoirs, PP 412414. So that was Jesus saying that to Lucia. It'd be
Yeah.
done late. So when it says it'd be done late, I mean, of course, we go back and say, well, 1960 was the deadline because it would be obvious by then. That's what was said. And then, of course, it wasn't done by John the 23rd. Following year, 1961, we have Our Lady appearing in Garabandal. Now, again, with John Paul Nat, we've already covered these consecrations. Even if his was valid, it was still 24 years too late in 1984. Um, or whenever it was he done it. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up with this. Yeah, 1984.
84. Yeah.
It was 81. He had the assassination attempt. So, and again, if Francis, who's been more specific in doing it the way it had to be, Russia had already invaded Ukraine, and it was the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that reached out for him to do it. So he done it for one reason or more. And now it's the case, right? But this is where we need the hope. It's Jesus' own words there. Nevertheless, it has been entrusted to his mother. This is where all this time from Quito, Ecuador, through to now, in these centuries, and increasingly more apparitions the past century, is the whole point where this has to come to a conclusion. And I don't think it's a big preparation just for one great big war. I think it's all to do with what's happening with the church as well. So there's this parallel of the world and the church running together right now. The geopolitical side with Russia, this war. We're hearing words conscription mentioning in this country and other countries. The fact NATO's likely to be at war with Russia in the next 2 to 3 years. All these different things popping up, but yet at the same time in the church, we're getting confusion, we're getting fiducia supplicans, we're getting the change in Marian apparition norms, all these things coming out at the same time. And there's real division in the church like never before. And maybe just to focus that a little bit in the church for now, then, because I keep saying to people, let's just say we've got, maybe put it up for the audience. Look at the image of Fatima. Now, of course, Lucia gives us a very clear detail on that with her own writing. She even speaks about the cork hewn bark of the cross, all these details. But the one point where she saw the Pope, well, the bishop in white, who they had an impression it was the Pope. But later in the text, she speaks about how she saw the Pope walking over the city half in ruins, passing all the lay people and those in the church of every rank, only to reach the cross where he was shot with bullets and arrows. Um, some people take that symbolism just as John Paul II, but like you've already pointed out with the ocean waters and rising and things, where's the city half in ruins? Where were all the other people being shot? Where are the soldiers coming from, etc.? But I would say look at the echoes of a few other messages, and a couple I want to just point out here right now is if we go back even to Anne Catherine Emmerich, now notice these dates. We already know there's a false church coming from within, and I'll get to a couple of those quotes as well. But Anne Catherine Emmerich, first of all, on April 12th, 1820, she had the vision of a great tribulation, and seemed like a concession was demanded from the clergy, which could not be granted. And she saw many older priests weeping bitterly, a few younger ones also, but then others who were lukewarm readily went to what was demanded. She saw a great battle within the church. I'm going to, because there's quite a bit of text to this, it was a battle within the church, on one side with the Pope and his followers, and on the other side, a large group of men who I recognized as false prophets and their followers. There was much larger crowds. The false prophets were spreading lies and errors. We also saw a false church being built against the true church. Again, it could be symbolism to maybe something more on the mystical side. But she speaks about the relationship between the two popes on the following month, May 13th, 1820. Quote, I saw also the relationship between the two popes. I saw how baleful would be the consequences of this false church. She saw it increase in size. Heretics of every kind came into the city of Rome. The clergy grew lukewarm. There was a great darkness. And the fact that there was Catholic communities being oppressed, harassed, confined, and deprived of freedom, great miseries, but then everywhere wars and bloodshed. A wild and ignorant mob took violent action. Now, the reason I say that part there, and I'll leave it there for now, look at the dates, April 12th and May 13th. Now, May 13th obviously stands out because of the Fatima apparition. It's also when John Paul II was shot. But you know yourself, what one stands out is April 12th?
Yeah,
Trevor Bruno. Because he also echoes about an angry mob attacking the Vatican as well.
his dream. Yeah.
Yeah. And where the Pope looked as if he was shot or wounded in some way, he wasn't sure if he was dead. He also speaks about warning with Islam in Rome, warning about Russia. And again, it goes back to other revelations such as Marie Julie Jahenny with the exact same echoing with the Islamists coming in, with Russia coming over right through Europe, through France. And at the same time, all this is going on within the church. And just to finalize, maybe with Padre Pio, like you mentioned before with Father Gabriel Amorth, that's what I've got here to quote. Father Gabriel furrows his brow and sticks to the chin. He seems affected. Indeed, he states, one day Padre Pio told me very sorrowfully, you know, Gabriel, it is Satan who has been introduced into the bosom of the church, and within a very short time will come to rule a false church. There's that key word again. It goes on with all of it there. It must have been about 1960 since I was already a priest then. Again, the date. It goes on about a bit more with it. And then they ask him, did he allude to the same plagues prophesied in the Holy Scriptures? You know, was it anything to do with future catastrophes, floods, wars, etc.? And he answers, sorry, quote, nothing of that sort mattered to him, however terrifying they proved to be, except for the great apostasy within the church. This was the issue that really tormented him, for which he prayed and offered a great part of his suffering, crucified out of love. The third secret of Fatima, exactly as the dialogue went. So again, Padre Pio links into the point of Anne Catherine Emmerich, as in Bruno with Trefontane, and which we could take as Ratzinger said back in 1984. These things allude to other Marian apparitions and what's in Scripture. There's
Also,
definitely something with the rise of the false church. And it's trying, for me, it's trying to say, well, I'm not anti-Francis, but I see great list of concerns in the last several years. I don't want to be another YouTube channel or a guy behind the screen picking every single thing the man does or says. But there are concerns and signs of things that are going, wait a minute here, look at what these holy saints and mystics and visionaries such as Fatima have said.
we have to listen.
Look what's rolling out. That's the key. Because it comes to the point, where are we going here? What side are we going on? The true or the false church? How are we going to, it's going to be a great deception, isn't it? We have to be aware of with Satan and his deceiving ways.
So we have two choices. We can do what Pope John 23rd did in 1960. We can look at the message and say, "Ah, I'm not going to pay any attention to that," or we can listen to it. Now, not paying any attention to it, you can see what happened after 1960. heaven was not pleased. And Garabandal was all about a response. Garabandal is basically the retelling of the Fatima message in a very dramatic fashion, where she stayed there for 4 years and appeared 2,000 times. 2,000 times, which is incredible. Now, I know Medjugorje has been going on longer, and that is really the apparition of the end times. Like we talked about before, I think that's going to continue until the end time events occur, like the warning and the miracle and so forth. She's going to be there through the whole secrets, the 10 secrets. But basically, you have everything that you would think of in Garabandal that was mentioned in Fatima. You have the warning of the apostasy. You have the chastisement, which is the fire falling from the sky, where they had the night or the night of the screams, they call it, where they had these visions of fire being enveloped with fire. And that corresponds, if not to the text, it corresponds to the vision of Fatima, where you have the angel with the flaming sword pointing to the earth. That really is symbolism of a chastisement of the fire from the sky. And one thing about that vision is very symbolic. It's symbolic on the line of the book of Revelation, that kind of symbolism we're talking about when you look at the vision. So people arguing that Pope John Paul wasn't killed, so it couldn't be about him and things like that. That's they're really not. They're missing. They're not understanding that the vision is symbolic, and really the Pope represents the Church in that regard, where he gets killed, like you mentioned, with the bullets and the arrows. And also, it wasn't just the Pope that was killed, but the vision's explicit about cardinals and priests and lay people being killed as well at the top of the hill. And that is definitely representation of the church going through its persecution, going through its own Calvary. And it's a chastisement. And I think we take for granted that some of these events that have occurred are chastisements. Like World War II was definitely a chastisement. You could look at this manufactured illness recently as a chastisement. The apostasy itself is a chastisement. Having bad shepherds is a chastisement, like you mentioned, Mark, with St. Jude's. And, we can't, we have to look through the eyes of faith at these things. It's easy to dismiss them by saying, well, this is just an event that occurred. Manufactured illness had nothing to do with being a chastisement. And that just happened to occur right after the Pachamama scandal that we had in the Vatican. Is that a coincidence? I mean, it actually, I know it really did not become evident until March of 2022, but it actually started late the preceding year.
Mm-hmm.
These things are tied together, and there's consequences to our actions and our inactions, as the case may be.
I think also what I usually say to people, put the Fatima image up in front of you, read Bruno's account of the angry mob at the Vatican, then read Anne Catherine Emmerich's account of the angry mob at the Vatican. Then I think there was another one I forget already. Marie-Julie Johanny, I'm sure mentioned a bit about it. There has to, I think there's definitely this false church, the bigger thing that troubled Padre Pio was the apostasy, the false church, which these people all speak about. I think that's clearly coming about now, and we are entering into a time where we're going to see more and more of that to a point where something snaps and then it's happened, and the consequences are going to snowball, and we'll have to make that choice. The other side of it is everything that's happening in the world, especially when it comes to concerning Russia, the geopolitics. You keep that Fatima image up and read these other sources independently while looking at that image of what Lucia had, and you're going to see the worldly part there. And sometimes it's at the back of my head, Bob, that right now with this synod, I mean, Garabandal speaks about something like a schism, about the illumination of conscience, the great warning, the event that's to come that will coincide with the synod or something like that. But right now, this synod underway, and it's to resume later in the year again, it has people of all different ranks, including the laity. We're at this Pope where he's at the end of St. Malachy's list. Conveniently, one of the two popes prophesied by Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, and the four popes of Garabandal are done with Benedict now, who was the other second pope at the time. So there's a lot of
Yes.
stuff happening right now where, at the back of my head, when you think of those messages being repeated with that image, the city half in ruins, the angry mob, the Pope being attacked and killed, and all the other people of every rank. Look at the state of Italy and Europe right now with the prophesied mass migration, with the prophesied war ensuing again with Russia, which is a clear indication that they haven't converted clearly. But I just think in the back of my head sometimes, and I hope it never happens, but what if something comes about in the next year or so with this synod underway and whatever triggers a great attack of the Vatican? Because if it is to be exactly in the physical, material sense, not the spiritual or mystical of what that young girl at the time saw and what these other visionaries have repeated, something physically has to attack the Vatican, the Pope, the ranks of the Catholics, all the way from cardinals down to the laity. The stage is set with this synod, possibly the timing.
So what the synod is, so you mentioned there's people there of all ranks. There's people there that are of all ranks of a certain thought. So there's not representation. There's not a lot of diversity ideologically, which is unfortunate because the faith has nothing to do with ideology. The faith is the faith, and we shouldn't mix the two up. But unfortunately, that's what's happening in the synod. So you hear people complaining that, they think there should be certain topics being discussed at the synod, but they're not. And where are these topics coming from? So if you have a poll of what can we do to fix the church, it's not going to be fiducia supplicans. It's not going to be, hey, we need women deacons. I don't know anybody who's asking for the women deacons, but apparently that's going to be the subject of the next synod. Why? So the agenda is predetermined, and there's this. It's basically a cover that they're trying to show like they're being all inclusive and is coming from the bottom up, but it's not. The agenda is already predetermined, and it was going to be about the subject it was last time, and it's going to be about the subject that I just mentioned next time. Now, they they looked at, I think what happened at the synod is they could not produce a document that would have been acceptable to the church. And so they decided not to address the topic that was addressed in fiducia supplicans. But fiducia supplicans itself was really not, it's really not accepted by the church. So there's widespread rejection of it. You have bishops standing up, whole Episcopal conferences standing up saying, we're not going to, you know, we're not going to uphold this document. We're not going to execute it. And that's one of the ways, one of the reasons why you have to have faith in the church. The church is doing what it's supposed to do. So if something is contrary to faith and morals, whether it be doctrinal or it be a practice, it's the church's role and the role of bishops to say that it's against faith and morals or something that they should basically accept and make part of what they do in their own diocese. And the other thing I see with that is the ecumenical process with the Orthodox has been set back like 100 years because of these documents that are coming out and some of the practices coming out of this pontificate. And I'm not bashing the Pope. I'm all in favor of advocating for the papacy. And sometimes to advocate for the papacy, you have to advocate for the faith. And if there's documents that are coming out that are problematic with faith and morals, it's not our duty to blindly obey them. It's our duty to say so. It's our duty to defend the faith. Otherwise, if we did not do that as Catholics, we would all be Arians, because that's what happened in the Arian heresy. We'd all be Arian heretics. So, in the end, I think it's going to be the priests and the laity that save the church with the help of Jesus, the intervention of Jesus and of heaven.
Yeah.
But the hierarchy itself seems to be, I won't say lost, but they seem to have lost their way. And there's mistrust. There's people talking about leaving the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, it has been going on for a while, but it's even more so now.
Mm-hmm.
And, where are you going to go is the response of St. Peter. This church has the true faith, and you're really only jeopardizing your soul by leaving and rejecting the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is not just the Pope, it's not just a bishop. There may be a bishop that is doing things that shouldn't be doing where you live, not just a priest at your parish. The church is all of us, and not only all of us living today, but those who have come prior. So if you leave the church, you're leaving St. Augustine, you're leaving St. Aquinas, you're leaving St. John of the Cross, you're leaving them as well. You're leaving all the popes that have preceded this one and all the popes that will come. And you're actually rejecting Jesus, because the church is really Jesus's church. He's the head of the church. The Pope is what they call the visible head, but Jesus is the true head of the church. And I'm not trying to plug this, Mark, but I just did a video on an Orthodox saint. And what I came to notice in doing that is that they have a lot of faith that's the same as ours, but it's not 100% the same. And they are not in union, with the Pope, which they should be. They should be in union with Rome. And I'll say this again, I'm going to keep saying it. Anyone who's happy with this disunity is sinning. And I'm directing that to my friends on the Orthodox side, because there are many that are happy with their current condition. Now, there are some differences in the faith, and some of them are serious. Some of them are practices, like they have differences in how they look at divorce, and they're not united amongst themselves. There's different national Orthodox churches. But what I noticed between the saints is that there's not the stigmata. You don't see the stigmata on the saints on the Orthodox side. You don't see bilocation. You don't have these gifts that we see readily in the saints that we have in the Catholic Church. So there's not this fullness of the spiritual gifts. And that's because they're not fully aligned with the Church of Jesus. I'm not saying that they're bad. I think that 99% of their faith and our faith is the same. And maybe there's one exception that I have about their conception of the Holy Trinity, which theologians can argue about. But um, aside from that, we're very much united. And that's why you see sanctity in the Orthodox side as well. Like you see, they do have incorruptible saints, like we do in the Roman Catholic Church. They do have foresight saints with the ability to prophesy. And they also have uh, saints that can read hearts, that can heal, and so forth. And you don't see that in the Protestant churches. And I'm using quotes on the Protestant churches, but you don't see that in their denominations. And that's because they are far removed in faith from the Catholic Church. Now, they're not some good people that are Protestants, yes. And in some cases, they follow the truths that they know better than we do in a lot of cases. But they don't have the fullness of the truth. They're not aligned with the Roman Catholic Church. And that's why you don't see the same level of sanctity in the Protestants.
Mm.
It's just not there. You don't see Marian apparitions there either. And you don't see the Marian apparitions, with few exception, you don't see them on the Orthodox side as well. So when heaven speaks, heaven is speaking to the Roman Catholic Church. There's exceptions, like I mentioned, like there's been Marian apparitions in the Coptic Church. And Rushev was kind of a mixture of the Roman Catholics and Orthodox, but in most cases, heaven is speaking to the Catholic Church. And that's where you belong. And that's why you shouldn't leave, because
Yeah.
we have the fullness of the faith.
I've never thought about it that way before, Bob, actually, because I was aware that they've got their own perhaps mystics or saints, or they've had apparitions as well. And sometimes you wonder, well, is one right or both right or something? But like you say, and I'll take your word for it. If the no registered person ever bilocating or stigmata, and if something stands out about that, it's a fresh way to hear it. But I think that's why she's appearing and consistently as Our Lady. I think that's why she's been appearing as consistently as she has. Because I think we are reaching the fulfillment of everything that's been prepared for. And we can see all the bad, the doom and gloom. But like Father Gabriel Amorth said about Padre Pio, none of all these bad stuff, earthquakes, famines, wars, none of that bothered him. It was just what bothered him the most, what he offered his suffering for was against the rise of the false church. And I think that's why we have to live the messages more than anything, like more than ever. Because when these things come, can we have the fullness of the Holy Spirit in us, like the great saints and the mystics for these times? Because that's what's going to get us through. That's what's going to bring in the change, the purification, and the build up again for whatever else comes. And I don't know if you saw the video a couple of months ago now I did with Frances Hogan. I know she does a lot with the divine will, and I know you're very much in with the divine will. But she did mention something about, even you look at the old calendars, the ancient jubilees and things she spoke about, we are getting into a new era biblically, the calendar wise. And she's been looking into all that, the Dead Sea Scrolls, even this biblical scholar who's toured the world for many, many decades, even putting the apparitions and everything we've discussed tonight to the side, that everything's coming on the cycle of the Bible, of the ancient calendars and how they measured time, and the fact that now 2025 will be the new era of what we're getting into, and this new jubilee. Again, we're hearing new eras all the time from apparitions as well. But for me, it's like the tectonic plates. The old is going down, the new is rising up, and this is the shaking. This is the earthquakey shake until we come into the new springtime. And it is a positive thing maybe to finish with is the fact we're not just being prepared for the bad things, we're being prepared for heaven and earth. And that's why we're going to be astounded with what God's going to do and how he's going to step in. Because right now, I completely believe it's beyond human intervention. It's never going to change anytime soon with people trying and fighting against the tide, against the norms of civilization today, especially of the West. Divine intervention is needed, and that's what's been obtained through our Blessed Mother asking for it. And now she's asking us to do our part to bring in the triumph. What do you think in that? Maybe final words to see how it's all coming about then?
So regarding the divine intervention, I think Pope John Paul II, during his life, he was already in the position where he thought that that's what was required, that really that was needed, and that by our own devices, we have no recourse to righting the ship. And he was asked about one time about having another council to basically adopt reforms of the previous council, Vatican II council. And he said, no, 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 we can't do another council because what's really needed is heaven's intervention. And I'm paraphrasing what he said, but that's basically what he said.
Yeah, and I think it's coming very soon. I don't
Yeah.
want to break the code or try and figure it out. There's no point. I'm trying to love the messages, but you just see everything happening in the world. It's the jigsaw pieces are coming quicker. The picture's becoming a bit more clearer of the times that we're living in, and I think we're in the thick of it, to be honest.
And so I think I skipped something. I want to maybe finish with this, Mark.
Sure.
Um, I skipped something we talked about the consecration. I mentioned that there was an additional proof. So there's a stigmatist that lived in Rome. His name was Antonio Rufino, and he's not one that was big on prophecy or a lot of messages. He lived during the time of Pope Pius XII, and he lived for some time. And I think I forget the exact year, but he passed away in the 90s. In the 90s, before he passed away, one of his prophecies was that the current pope, which was Pope John Paul II, and this is in the 90s, he said he would not be the one to consecrate Russia. And he said it would not be the next pope, which would be Benedict. He said it will be the one after the next pope. And again, his name's Antonio Rufino, and you can look him up and you'll find that story. And he's not to be trifled with. I know he's not that well known, but Pope Pius XII actually built a chapel where he received a stigmata. So that tells you a lot about the position of the local bishop, which is the Pope, regarding whether this is a true mystic or not.
Yeah, I have the quote here. It's slide 31. I've got in front of me, just as you mentioned the quote of his message. I remember that one. So yeah, and then again, Pius, which one was it? Sorry, Pius the 12th.
The 12th, yes.
He was the one that was the Pope at the time of Bruno's
Yes,
apparition.
yeah,
There's a lot, you know what stood out as well as Pope Pius the 12th was ordained a priest on May 13th, 1917, the first apparition of Fatima. And many years later, he's in the thick of it with the Tre Fontane as Pope.
yeah. And he was a very good pope, and he also in the Vatican Gardens he actually experienced the dancing of the sun, the Fatima dancing of the sun.
Such a
That's something.
significance on that one individual man. because of his date of ordination, the fact that Our Lady appeared years later and sent the messenger to him to say, one day you'll be Pope. And
Yes.
then he became Pope. And then soon after, the apparitions to Bruno began and everything that came with that. I've done videos as you have as well. There's a significance why this man had such a role. I know he was Pope, but the day of his ordination and everything, just everything fitted in. There's something about all that for some
Yeah.
reason, maybe.
Yeah. And the other thing to bring out about that, and I hope people look into your video about Tre Fontane as well, because it's really a remarkable apparition, Our Lady of Revelation, is that someone before Bruno was actually converted and the apparition occurred, someone was sent to Pope Pius the 12th before he became the Pope. I think it was 10 years prior, and I don't remember her name, but she told Cardinal Pacelli, then who was to become Pope Pius the 12th, that he would become the Pope and that there would be someone who would come speak to him, referring to Bruno.
Mhm. It's an
So
amazing story. It's one of my
remarkable.
recent ones that I've really, really enjoyed the past year of getting this book. It's amazing. But it has significance from Fatima right through. And now Father Gobi's cause of uh, sainthood is underway, isn't it? And Our
Yes.
Lady appeared to him as Our Lady of Revelation as well.
Yes. So again, Pope. So Father Gobi, he was also one that mentioned there's a prophecy, a message from our Blessed Mother to him about this false church you're talking about. And is also mentioned in Tre Fontane, where our Blessed Mother warns about trying to create a church within a church. It's exactly what she's talking about there. There's another message, well, not a message, but a prophecy from Venerable Fulton Sheen about the ape of the church.
Mhm.
And that one actually is probably the most concise and detailed prophecy about the false church that's out there because he goes into explaining what it is. And it's, I don't have it handy, but it's one that I'm recommending that if someone wants to look at it, to just look up that Fulton Sheen ape of the church.
Yeah, I'm aware of it, but I could revise it again to remember it. Everything just seems to echo, doesn't it, Bob? They're all echoing. This is pre-social media, pre-internet, no fame and recognition to be sought after in any way, shape, or form. Many of these individuals suffered for it, one way or another. And yet
Right.
it's the same message all the time. The rise of the false church within, a great apostasy, and then at the same time, great chastisements through Russia, through the world in one way or another, all happening at the same time. But we're bridging into a new era where Our Lady's been preparing us all along for the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. We're seeing the last decisive battle, according to Lucia Fatima, where it would be over marriage and family. We're seeing the attack of it for the last 20 years that I can see intensifying more and more. And we need to be like the ship of John Bosco's dream. You've got the pillar of the Eucharist and Our Lady, and we have to keep in the center to keep the storms away. And I would urge everyone not to be disheartened, but you have to keep persevering. And we can't do that on our own strength. It has to be in God's strength. And that's why she's pleading with us constantly. Pray, 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 fast, confession at least once a month, penance, read scripture. We have everything. We have the fullness of the Holy Spirit, and we just have to keep following God's will.
We can have the hope and assurance that we're going to see, hopefully in our lifetime, hopefully soon, the promise of the Our Father, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven,
Mhm.
and thy will be done. Well, I should say that I misquoted, but thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and thy kingdom come.
Living in the kingdom, living in the will of the Lord. And yeah, and everything else we know, the illumination of conscience, the miraculous signs, more conversions than ever. That's the stuff we want to end with because people are getting confused, people are disheartened, people are falling away. But this is where we need to fight the good fight and make it to the end. Like St. Paul says, we have to keep going. We have to keep ourselves spiritually fit and love the messages, love the faith, keep focused on Jesus and let the rest of the storm pass by. Just keep that focus and he'll put us to good use.
Yes, absolutely.
Bob, it's been a pleasure as always. I know we've covered a good hour or so there. Thank you very much for your time as always. And I'd urge everyone else, remember to check out Bob's channel at Elijah's Cloak. The link will be in the description box below, where you'll find plenty of content similar to this and much more as well. And until next time, take care and God bless.
God bless, and thank you.